Hello, PriceSmart. Welcome to our podcast, At the Club, a communication channel with our employees, where we will share valuable information, fascinating topics, and inspiring stories that you haven't heard before, keeping us connected on a whole new level. Join us on this journey and discover everything happening at the club.
I'm a girl dad, father of 3 daughters.
You have the power to influence culture at this company for the better.
The important thing is that before the revenue line in the P&L, there's a line that's missing, and it's called people, because people drive the number. How difficult is that person to replace?
But more importantly, life is really approaching hard conversations with compassion, directness.
I have a lot of trainings going on in our company.
Welcome to At the Club, PriceSmart's employee podcast. This is episode 3. I'm here in Miami with our guest this month, Terry Mahon. I'm really excited about today's conversation. He's looking at all sorts of topics, culture, leadership, some of Terry's personal history, and just exploring topics that I hope are relevant and interesting to you. This week, I had the pleasure to be in Aruba and Barbados, visiting our warehouse clubs and teams there, and it was a fantastic visit. And I really appreciated getting to have a chance to spend time on the floor with our buyers, warehouse operators, learning about all the things we're doing really well and the areas where we can improve, the opportunities we have to improve. In particular, I was really excited about the seasonal merchandise that I saw on the floor, some of the exciting foods, seasonal foods, both local and U.S., as well as what we're doing with the everyday merchandise. Really well merchandised clubs that were busy, and for the teams that hosted me, thank you for having me, and thanks for all that you're doing. So Terry, welcome.
Yeah, look, thank you for having me. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, no worries. We're getting practice here, getting these podcast episodes going, and it's great to have you and to be, I guess, in your new hometown, Miami. So unfortunately we're not at the PriceSmart office today, but we're here on site. Where we had our quarterly board meeting. So you're catching me after the board meeting.
Sure, absolutely. And I see you have your coffee, which is good.
Yeah, I needed to power up, PriceSmart, not powered by Dunkin' in this case, but, good enough. I wish it was a member selection coffee. So just to dive right in, my hope in having you today, I look at you as one of kind of the gurus of leadership and working with people at the company. And I know you've had a long career working with lots of different kinds of teams to develop that great skill set that you have. I was particularly impressed, and it really made an impression on me, your talk in the buying breakout session around at YBM around how to work as teams, breaking down the barriers, and really how to collaborate effectively. So just to kind of kick it off, I was wondering if you could share a little bit about where you're from, how you got to be at PriceSmart, and a little bit about your backstory.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, it's interesting. Maybe my story would probably take up your entire podcast. So
we'll do an abridged version.
So I'll have to do the abridged version. But I'm originally from Barbados, which is a tiny island in the halfway between the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. Just about 300,000 people, literally, maybe 100,000 households on the island, but lots of economic activity. And, being from an island, and I grew up in the more, or rather the less fortunate part of the island, in a very urban community. But one of the things that is available in most of the islands is free education. So you do have the opportunity to educate yourself at very little cost. And fortunately for me, I took advantage of that. So I started there with a local company, which is actually, at that time, was actually the largest in the Caribbean. It's called Massey today, but way back then it was called Barbados Shipping and Trading. So I started out in their agrochemicals department, and then I was promoted and handed the reins to their packaging division, which was an interesting experience.
I bet it was.
Yeah, I did a lot of travel to Central America. We represented a company there called Vigua of the Sesca, and they made glass bottles. This was all pre-PET, so there were no PET bottles in those days.
So that company was actually selling glass bottles in Central America.
Yeah, and the Caribbean. So we represented them throughout the Caribbean. We also represented a company in Trinidad called Carib Glass, and they blue glass bottles of all shapes and sizes. Again, we distributed throughout the Caribbean. and a company in the United Kingdom called Beats and Clark, which provided bottles for medicines. They still exist today, believe it or not. Those little brown bottles, see. And on top of that, in that packaging division, the company I worked for also had a joint venture arrangement with an Indian paper mill located in Guyana on the farm East Bank. So I spent so much time in Guyana. It was incredible. And again, we distributed corrugated cartons, what is commonly known as a cardboard box, but it's a huge industry right throughout the Caribbean. And we also represented a company out of the Dominican Republic called Cartonajes Hernandez. And again, I spent a lot of time in the DR. So our packaging division was multifaceted, and it allowed me the opportunity, quite frankly, to travel a lot throughout Central America, the Caribbean.
Yeah.
After that, in the company, I was handed the reins or added to my portfolio. I was promoted to look after their automotive division, which we distributed automotive aftermarket products. Okay. So we were agents for very reputable names like Michelin, Pirelli, British Petroleum, Texaco, which is now Chevron today. We distributed all of their lubricants, things like WD-40, Turtle Wax, etc. So again, and that was a Caribbean-wide distribution operation that we had. And maybe in another 2 years, I think I was promoted and added to my portfolio was the 5 retail locations that we had, which consisted of stores that sold furniture and appliances, white goods, brown goods.
And at that time, were they Massey stores?
No, it was still the Costa Mannings was the name of the chain. It wasn't rebranded yet as Massey. And we competed vigorously with competitors from Central America called Unicomer. And in those days, they were called Unicomer. Yeah. You know, they were known as Quartz. And
which we also have.
Yes. And attached to those stores were a chain of pharmacies that sold OTCs as well as dispensed medications. That also fell under my portfolio. So added to the packaging and the automotive distribution was a chain of furniture and appliance stores. And then I was...
It's an incredibly broad
set of absolutely
responsibilities and experiences. And for those that don't know, Massey and Quartz, now called Massey and Quartz, are 2 of our competitors. But like many things in the Caribbean and Central America, a series of acquisitions and partnerships, and there's small markets where many things kind of evolve over time. And there's lots of connections.
Absolutely. Yeah. Then my career took an interesting turn in that, added to that, I then took over our commercial building division. So we brought Ace Hardware stores, the chain of Ace Hardware store to the island. We also distributed commercial and domestic building products.
Right. And Ace was a franchise.
It was a franchise. It was a franchise. And I spent time importing. We imported by barge. We literally barged in lumber from Honduras because we had 3 lumber operations. So that was attached to the commercial hardware distribution, where we distributed very reputable names as well, like Tramontina and some of those brands. And believe it or not, David, attached to that, we also sold explosives to the military, not only in Barbados, but in the region. We imported that from Texas. Austin, Texas was also part of my portfolio.
I mean, whatever people need.
Exactly. Yeah. Additionally, as well, I also managed part of our shipping division. We had a shipping division. We were agents for Tech Marine Lines, as well as P&O Ned Lloyd. So we handled a lot of the cruise ships as well as cargo ships. And we also distributed fertilizer, believe it or not, to the agricultural sector from a company in the Dominican Republic called Fersan. And I also managed a company which was part of that group that produced liquefied petroleum gas under license from Texaco, which is now Chevron, which is also...
It was a real conglomerate.
It was a real conglomerate. So, we had a very, very diverse set of operations or business divisions. And I started as a manager back then, and after 20 years, I'd risen to the level of managing director and CEO of the Costa Mannings Group, which had many different business units involved. Everything from stationery, we did deals with Office Depot, to Ace Hardware, so food retail, brown goods, white goods.
And did you come to PriceSmart after that experience?
Funny enough, no. It's interesting, the journey, because I left the Costa Mannings, which was called in those days before it was known as Massey. I received a call one day and I thought it was a prank call. I almost didn't take it. And the person indicated they were calling on behalf of the prime minister at that time.
Okay.
And I finally took the call, and then, he came on the line and said, I would like to have breakfast with you. And I said, okay.
The prime minister?
The prime minister.
Oh, wow.
And
So you knew it was for real?
Yeah, I knew it was for real. So I drove to his official residence, and he asked me to chair the board of the Grantley Adams International Airport. So I accepted, and that gave me the opportunity to have 4 years in civil aviation, really understanding and delving into the complexity of landing and taking off and turning wrong aircraft and everything that goes along with civil aviation. So I was the chairman of the board of that airport for 4 years. Then I went on to serve on the board of a company called the Barbados Agricultural Credit Trust. And that company oversaw all of the government-owned sugarcane estates, which were, in excess of probably 50 estates that we looked after. And I did that for a while. And then I went on to be the interim CEO. I dipped my toe into the NGO space, as I was the acting CEO for the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Barbados. And then I dipped my toe into academia because I was also the chairman of one of the more successful local schools on the island called Trinity Academy, which I did for a couple of years as well.
It's hard to believe you had time for all these things.
It's amazing, but so I think that, it's really a fantastic journey.
It sounds like amazing.
I had the opportunity
amazing set of experiences
to experience and manage in many different industries at very senior levels, which gave me, good visibility and helped also to hone my outlook and skills in terms of dealing with people and complex issues and stuff.
Right. So before we move on to the chapter about PriceSmart and your time with us, I'm curious if you could share, if you think back about, this is such a broad set of experiences and very diverse set of industries. If you can think of some of the kind of takeaways of the things you learned, maybe things you enjoyed, things you didn't like. How did that, because a lot of life is chance and luck, but a lot of it's just process and journey, right? And so what are some of the things that you take away in reflection from that chapter in your life, or those chapters, I should say?
I think that the one thing a couple of things I take from it, and one is, I own in a career that spans that long, it's never a perfect journey.
No.
And I've learned over the years to really own your mistakes, because that's how you learn and grow. But it also taught me that, as part of your leadership journey, to develop an affinity to really stand on the things you believe in.
Yeah.
And to develop the fortitude to make decisions based on information you have at the time, and be willing to stand behind those decisions, be able to be accountable for those decisions. And I'll share with you a funny story. Back then, I recall when I was the CEO of what was then, which is now the Massey, but
right.
was then the Foster Mannings.
Right.
I'm driving from the airport because I had to take a representative who came to meet with me, and I said, hey, I'll take you to the airport. And I'm driving from the airport, and I see this huge plume of smoke. And I'm thinking, oh my God, and this is just before Christmas. I'm thinking, this is terrible. Somebody's house or business is on fire. And then within 10 minutes, my phone was going off, and I had my staff calling me to say, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we had a store that was one of our flagship locations located in the south of the island.
So it was your business.
That was on fire. That was burning. So diverted to go there, and in the end, they couldn't salvage it.
Who did you have in the car?
I had just brought this representative to the airport, so I was on the way back to the office. So it's just me in the car. But the interesting thing was getting there, and the business was a total loss, of course.
Right.
They weren't able to save it. And, just before Christmas, and, we're kind of having to make this decision. Number one is to, what are we going to do with the employees from this location? And so we were, I was put on the spot as to what are we going to do?
Now you had X amount of employees.
And we have the press poking microphone.
And they are out of work.
Yeah,
they were working at this location.
Absolutely. And, I made a decision that we were going to keep them employed until we got the store recovered, rebuilt.
Wow.
And of course,
You knew you were going to rebuild.
I was hoping we were going to rebuild. And remember, in those days, I was reporting to a board of directors, and it's sufficient to say it was a bit of a contentious discussion.
I bet.
I had, to make a decision, but I felt comfortable in standing behind that decision because I was convicted in my belief of what we needed to do. And
it was the right thing.
And it was the right thing to do.
It's a high integrity thing to do.
And those are some of the lessons I learned coming out of that journey.
Yeah.
Always be convicted based on the information presented before you, what you have, what you know.
Right.
And you make a decision and you stand behind that decision. There's always opportunity in hindsight to assess whether or not it was the right decision. But in the moment, having that conviction to be decisive enough as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of a set of main responsibilities for any person managing a team is within the scope of work for that manager to make decisions with conviction, to gather information, and I always look at separating the analysis from the decision as well. So, you try to do your best to get unbiased information, and you make a decision and you commit to it. And if it's not the right decision, you'll find out and you'll adjust. But the worst thing to do is to really not make a decision.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to flounder on it or to waffle on it.
And there's an old saying, that silence there's an old saying that silence is a powerful answer, or that no answer is an answer, but it's a powerful answer.
No decision is a decision.
It's a decision, and it's a powerful decision at that.
Absolutely. And sometimes that's okay. But if you're going to do that, make it intentional. Yeah, for sure. So what was your first role at PriceSmart?
So my first role at PriceSmart was in operations as a warehouse club manager. Again, it was an interesting story because someone from one of the search companies in Barbados actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm not sure if you're aware, but I think PriceSmart is looking for, a general manager for their operations."
That was maybe 2000.
And this was around it was in 2012.
Okay. So I think we maybe have been, because I know there was some expat folks that had
exactly
in country for a period.
And when they said that to me, I said, well, this is interesting. Now, by this time I had known about PriceSmart from the early 2000s because PriceSmart was going to become a competitor of the business I worked for.
Massey.
Yeah, next door. Our flagship store was in Warrens. The club was going to be a stone's throw away. And as a matter of fact, I'd flown to Trinidad just before the Barbados operation opened and walked into Chicago. Let's take a look at the competition. And it was interesting because when we came away satisfied that we were going to be okay, not for a couple of reasons, because we realized we were in a different business.
Right.
We were in the hire purchase business versus PriceSmart was more of a cash basis. But anyway, fast forward, I get that call and I think, oh, interesting. And I flew to Miami, met with Bill Nailon and John Hildebrandt and had a really interesting discussion with them in the Miami offices. And they played a really large part, honestly, in me joining the organization. Because at that time, I also had an opportunity to join another company at a much higher level with a responsibility for the entire Caribbean area. But one thing intrigued me was the culture that I saw, and that was described to me by them. And it intrigued me because I'd worked in all the different forms or formats of retail, but not a warehouse club.
Right.
And so, I knew I had to make a decision because the position was, from a career perspective, was, maybe a little bit of a step down, but it was such an interesting culture. I was so struck by it. I was really so struck by it.
What were some of the things that, I'm curious, like what were some of the things that stuck out to you early on that really captured your imagination, your attention?
The first thing that caught my attention was that here I was in Miami, Florida, and I wasn't a stranger to Miami because I've been there, over my life several times. And I'm at the hotel. And so I said, I'm going to take a taxi over to the office. And it struck me when John Hildebrandt, who I didn't know, but he was the EVP of operations, said, no, I'll come pick you up. And in my mind and the world I came from, typically you don't see things like that because people at that level, they're not going to leave their office to come pick you up from a hotel. And I was really amazed by that he did that. And so that stood out to me. Got to the office. I wore a tie, David, for 20 years because in the Caribbean, in the corporate culture, that's how we dress. So I wore a tie and sometimes a jacket or a blazer for almost 20 years. And I walk into an office and it's a very business informal. And that also struck me. The third thing that struck me was the fact that, I having met them, and the first thing he says to me, you call me Bill, which was different because, again, in the very structured corporate world of where I came from, it was always on a surname, Mr. surname, that type of basis. And then we just got into chatting and the, the ease of conversation, the way that employees interacted with, these two individuals who I did not know at the time, but obviously they're very senior in the organization, really stood out to me.
Sure.
And, when I heard them describe the organization and I coupled that with what I saw and what I experienced, even though that they didn't know it at the time, before the flight landed back in Barbados, I had already made up my mind that if they decided that I would be a good fit and they wanted me to join, that I would accept, even though I had, in my mind, I already had this other opportunity. So that's pretty much how it turned out. And I joined the Barbados operation there.
Those are really great points that you picked out from that experience. And the things I think sometimes maybe we take for granted, but we talk a lot about, we have an open door culture. We don't wear coats, right? We're a warehouse club. Talking about really being accessible, having management be accessible, leadership be accessible. And those are easy things to say, but they really take a commitment to do. And I'm happy you pointed them out because I think it's important for our managers in every one of the markets. We have so many differences in our cultures from a country perspective. Of we have 2 languages, I guess 3 if you count Papiamento, or 4 if you count Creole. But all these languages and all these different kind of national cultures and even divisions within a place like Colombia, but we all come together under one culture, which is PriceSmart. Sure. It's really important. So tell me about being a warehouse club operator. What was that like?
It was an interesting experience. I shouldn't say I didn't have a concept of what it would be like. I had a little inkling because of the excursion that I made to Trinidad, and I was in Trinidad for a couple of weeks as an induction before I actually took over the operation. So it was interesting, and it was a transition for me personally. And walking in and seeing, because department retailing is in a way very focused, and because the prior business that I engaged in or that I oversaw was predicated on that, what we call a hire purchase model, which is kind of like a lease to own. So you're pretty much a finance company in that sense. That's how you're making money.
So to kind of break that down, so people at Massey who are shopping at Massey or at many other retailers throughout the region, they may buy a television or some other high ticket non-foods item, and they actually will purchase it on they'll actually get a short-term loan to pay off for the TV, and the company really makes its money. Those companies make their money off of financing.
Pretty much. You walk in, you put $1 down, you walk out with their refrigerator, TV, whatever.
And some debt to service.
And some debt to service, 21% interest. You're going to pay that over 22 months. And it's kind of the reverse of a mortgage. We try to earn the principal first and the interest last, because the asset you have out there, which is the white good or brown good, the fridge or the sofa.
Of course, we don't do that.
We don't do that. Right? So it was interesting walking in. And of course, PriceSmart was, I like to say, retail on steroids. That's kind of the metaphor that I use for it, because of the pace, the volume, that went through that building, tremendous. And to have an operation that had so many different facets of retailing under one roof. And I think it's something that a lot of us take for granted, because most formats of retailing, yes, you may have white goods, brown goods, foods, non-foods, but think about this. In the Barbados operation, like most of our clubs, we were manufacturing because we had a full bakery back there. We were manufacturing in the sense that we had a food service back there. We were taking carcasses and breaking them down into their constituent granules in the meat room, which is like an abattoir, pretty much. And and then you're taking that meat and producing other things like ground beef and so on. So when you step back and think about it, it wasn't only retailing. We're actually retailing, we're actually manufacturing, because they're entities set up with whom we're competing, standalone manufacturers for those same products, all under one roof, and doing it in a far more efficient way, far more aggressively efficient in terms of headcount. So I think for me, it was quite a really pleasant experience. And then to see the tenure of people, people who have worked with the organization for, at that time, well over a decade, I think was really a tremendous experience.
Yeah,
so
sounds fun.
It was a fun exercise, a fun immersion.
Yeah, I bet. So what are some of the things during your tenure? Because of course now you're in human resources and you've moved around. You're not living in Barbados, so we'll get to that. But I'm curious, during your tenure as a club manager, what are some of the things you're most proud of?
I think I'm proud of the fact that, being able to see in people, in some of our employees, things that they didn't necessarily see in themselves, not because of a lack of confidence, but it's a peculiar thing. And I think as leaders in PriceSmart, is something that I always remind a lot of our leaders, that especially in those smaller markets, there's nothing that lights the fire of passion or engagement like when you can connect an individual and make them see that they're part of something far bigger than themselves.
Absolutely.
And you're in an island market, you're on a rock in the middle of the sea. But when you're able to connect the fact that what you do as an employee is part of this grand picture, this grand scheme of things, it really lights the fires of engagement and passion. And even though for many of us, we go into these markets and we take it for granted, I can tell you, having been a club manager in a market, the atmosphere, the energy of the employee body, knowing that someone like yourself or perhaps any other senior executive coming to that market does light that passion and engagement, because it's then that the connection is made that they're actually part of something bigger. And that's why I always even caution that we have to be super careful of the things we say and do, because they have the power to be highly motivating or disengaging. Because think about it, someone has just flown for 2,000 miles and they see our corporate offices as the aspiration, what I look up to. So I see an executive, I see a senior member of PriceSmart staff as aspirational for me. That's what I would like to be. And the preparation that goes into a visit, it's not only for show, it is really genuinely for that validation. And there's nothing that touches employees like for you or I or someone to walk in and to really affirm the job they're doing and they feel part of a bigger team. But of course, the converse is true, because one or two ill-thought words has the capability of reversing so much engagement has gone on. Because, similar to you and RA, looking up to someone who we look up to, who's traveled from so far away, come into your home or your space and you're aggressively or very negative. Imagine how you feel when they leave, right?
Yeah.
So people are looking for that affirmation. And so I found that that's what I'm proud of, that being able to build the team, their core group of people who will show up every day in good weather, bad weather. And, we're in a hurricane belt in the Caribbean, and they will give 200%. And to see that light go off in their minds when they hear of a visit and they really genuinely want to make that connection, I think I'm really proud of what we were able to do. And also coupled with the fact that in a highly, unionized environment, we were always able to to agree without being disagreeable with the union there, and not have contention and have very good relationship.
Right.
So we've existed very cordially in that market as well. So I was proud of all of those things and seeing people grow, people who I came in who didn't necessarily see in themselves what I saw in them, and seeing them now where they're at, having developed and grown and matured into leaders as well.
That's great. Yeah, that's one of the things those are great stories before I go on. And that really resonates with me, what you're saying, because we think, some of our listeners work in warehouse clubs. Hopefully a lot of you work in warehouse clubs. We have almost 12,000 employees, the majority of whom are working in DCs and warehouse clubs. However, some folks are also visiting from corporate offices. We have multiple, and we come in and we do floor walks. It's like a ritual that we have at PriceSmart to do a floor walk, look at merchandise, look at operating areas, maybe meat room, bakery, maybe click and go fulfillment. And you're right, it makes a big impact one way or the other. And I think a good thing to remember that I always try to remind myself is that positive feedback is really powerful, and you need a lot more positive feedback than you do constructive feedback. So when you do, it doesn't mean you don't need constructive feedback, but it means really choose wisely what you choose to notice and not notice. And sure, after a long day and somebody, you're tired, you're walking the floor, it's easy to not be so intentional, but I think it's a great reminder. If you're leading a team, even if it's not in a warehouse club, that, our people, they look up to those that are leading the individual teams, because everybody wants to grow, and we have a culture and a practice of hiring from within. So there really is that chance to grow.
Absolutely. And they see people, like, when people come in, their aspirations to be that person.
Yeah.
And whether or not we accept it by default, and it may not be by choice, we're mostly role models to a lot of these employees. And I can tell you, having been a club manager, and also because of connecting through my current role, the one thing that happens after any team visits a market from the corporate world, there is a buzz, because everyone wants to know, how did the visit go?
Believe me, we feel that way too.
How did it go? And the question of how did it go is a genuine question. Mm-hmm. There are employees that genuinely want to know that, did we make you happy, David? Was everything okay? And again, most people are, they're open to the feedback, but importantly is not necessarily what, but is how it's conveyed. Because again, as I said, one ill-thought word, or, not having the awareness of what your body language is conveying, or your speech, could erode what we've been trying to do in terms of building engagement and having persons feel really part of something bigger than themselves, because that ultimately is what fuels the fire and the passion of people to want to grow and aspire. The fact that I'm part of something bigger, I'm part of a tribe. And it's kind of like, for me, I go to a market, or I was walking through the airport and saw someone in a PriceSmart shirt, and immediately felt the connection. We were part of the same tribe. Turns out he was from the DR. But, and
you hadn't met before.
Yeah. No, but you feel that sense of connection. So
absolutely.
Yeah, that's why I think, and those are the things I'm proud about, as I said, to see people being able to develop in those ways, and to really feel connected to something bigger than themselves.
Right. I'm happy you brought that up again as well, because I think so much of meaning in life is about meaning in everything we do. And it's not just spiritual depth or family or whatever, it's also work. And so I think, one of the things that I can speak for our whole leadership team in saying that we try to do is instill a sense of purpose in PriceSmart. And I believe we really have that. We really have that for our employees, but also for our members, and also for our vendors, as we've grown so many wonderful local vendors into being export vendors and so on. So that, kind of the why behind the business is really important, and it really fuels the fire for sure. So it's kind of a good segue, because now you're a senior leader in HR. You, Diana, and the team have grown a really great HR department that I think is not just doing the basic day-to-day, but now starting to really focus on, in a more intentional fashion, focus on employee development, and leadership skills, technical skills, language skills, and also supporting in areas like benefits and recruitment and so on. So can you tell me a little bit about the role you're in now?
Sure. So currently, the first vice president of HR, responsible for our HR business partners. I have to make a confession, though, that, this is over 2 decades that I've really detested the term human resources, only because humans are, they're not a resource. And think,
Should we change the name?
we probably,
Talk to Diana.
absolutely. You think about it, I wouldn't, if I were to ask you with your wife and your son, and I said, who are those human resources you have at home? Resources are trees and things that come from the earth, but people are not really resources.
No.
I think that, it's something that for decades.
Why is it called that?
I think because in the classical practice of leadership of people, the name originated that way, but in most contemporary designs of people development, in most companies today, they'll have different names.
I guess Diana would be the chief people officer.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But to get back to your question, so my responsibility is to guide our global team of business partners, HR business partners, who are charged with the responsibility of taking care of our employees in terms of benefits administration, but also driving engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And then starting at the beginning of the employee life cycle journey, which goes back to attraction, retention, offboarding. They take care of industrial relation matters as well, employee engagement activities. But importantly, to really be able to partner and understand the business. That's the key with the leaders who are tasked with running the businesses within each territory.
Mm.
And I always tell my team, the important thing here to remember is that they have to be business people who happen to be in the people business. And that's very important because
I like that.
If you're
business people who are in the people business.
Because if you're not that, it is very difficult to gain credibility to speak to something you don't understand. And the one thing you will always hear from HR people is if you don't have a seat at the table. But the reason you'd never get a seat at the table is because if you don't speak the language of the business, then there's no connection. There's absolutely no line.
Yeah, that's so true.
And
that kind of goes for other areas of shared services. Sorry to interrupt, but I see that in finance and IT. Like finance, sure, accounting and finance, maybe we think of it as a business function, or typical, but there's also kind of a service function. But if they can't speak the language of what's actually going on in our business, then they're not really able to be a partner in the way that is most useful. Same thing with IT and so on. And I think, to your point, our HR, our people department is very much like that.
And so, and I try to inculcate in my team that, and precisely for that reason, because if they build strong business partnerships, then they're able to better guide the conversation to understand that, the business will look at the business as they're trained to do through the lens of the P&L. But there's something that needs to be added to the P&L and call it the PP&L. Because typically we'll start with the revenue and we'll go to our cost of goods and our margin and our expenditure. But the important thing is that before the revenue line in the P&L, there's a line that's missing, and it's called people, because people drive the numbers. And there's an author by the name of Hubert Jolly. He's one of the foremost turnaround CEOs in the world.
Hubert Jolly.
Yeah. Companies go to him and they're in trouble. And he made a really important point. He said, I walk into these companies and one of the things I always start with is asking to see the agendas of the executive leadership teams. And there's a consistency among companies that run into trouble in that. I look at their agendas and I can tell so much why they got here. Because people is the last agenda item and numbers is the first. And he always made the point that the people drive the numbers don't drive the people. And the conversation should be starting with the people, because that drives everything else.
You're right.
So even within my team, that's what I try to instill in them, that you have to be there to guide the conversation, to understand that with the P&L, there's another P that's missing. And you have got to start to guide the conversation with the people, which drives the revenue,
right?
Which drives everything else. And help the leaders to avoid the unconscious bias and the temptation to treat the people as the afterthought.
As resources.
As a resource.
So, let's maybe back up a sec. So maybe, or definitely not everyone that's listening has a P&L responsibility. A P&L is a profit and loss statement. It's one of three major financial statements that we look at, including balance sheet and cash flow. However, every one of you has an impact on the P&L, either of your area. That might be a budget within a portion of the P&L, G&A, or warehouse expenses, or so on and so forth. Or you own a P&L. You're an owner of a business unit or a cost center, correct? Which is more of maybe like a DC or some of the areas that service the clubs. So even if you're a manager within a department, or a manager within a team, within a team, within a department, we're all responsible. There's a shared responsibility for the impact on the P&L, but first for the people.
Yes, absolutely. Because without the people, nothing happens. And you think about our business, and we talk about people merchandise facility. That's the PriceSmart way.
Yep. 6 rights of people.
Yeah, but then you think about it, it's like, okay, so facility. I mean, we could find real estate. We may not like the price, but we could find it. Merchandise, we could find merchandise. It's just a matter of the technical competency to find it and be able to move it and land it somewhere in good and saleable condition. But you think about it, you lose that one high talent that you had, that high performer, high talent, or a good employee, and you ask yourself, how difficult is that person to replace? How does that impact the business?
Yeah.
So in the scheme of people merchandise facility, you think about, okay, if I'm the custodian of these 3 things, what's the one thing that's the most difficult to replace? And it's the people.
Absolutely.
It's the people.
And as one moves into leading teams and bigger teams and teams of teams, more and more time is spent on people. It doesn't mean that we're not accountable to the other things, but that people are really central to what we do here.
Sure.
So I'm curious now, we had a great year last year. We're entering another good year with some new challenges too in certain markets, as well as a lot of interesting initiatives on the agenda. I'm curious, from your perspective, for your area, what are some of your main focuses this year?
So this year, our focus is, I think we have some really good people in place in our HR team, and I'm really excited to see, their journey unfold as leaders in their own rights, and as they continue to learn and develop in the business. One of the things I'm super excited about is the ability to bring more structure to the way we develop our people. And the PriceSmart University, which we talked about at the YBM, is going to be the marquee project for that.
Okay. So what is that?
So, we have a lot of trainings going on in our company, and with a company that's a multinational, almost 12,000 employees, all at different levels, different areas that need to be upskilled or reskilled, it becomes difficult where there is no structure. And of course, for us, for many years, we've had these types of trainings now. But as we continue to build out our ESR portfolio and be able to demonstrate how we're developing our human capital, it means that we have to bring structure to all of these trainings that we're doing. So whilst we're not going to see it on a P&L and there's no line item that says training, we know that there's money being invested in developing our people. But we want to do it in a structured way. So PriceSmart University becomes the auspices under which we're able to deliver training in an agile way, synchronous and asynchronous, to our employee body. So, for example, employees will have the capability to self-learn based on what they would like to learn. They'll have visibility as to what people in their position in other organizations are learning. And then more importantly, they can learn at their own pace, because people learn it in different ways. And so we're partnering with LinkedIn Learning to do that, which creates that platform with machine-driven algorithms. So you log on, it says, "Hi, David, how are you? What would you like to learn today?" Well, I would like to learn accounting.
Right.
And it will curate the learning path, which is an on-demand learning path that enables you to learn at your pace. Now, the tool can also be used where there are opportunities that we want to address. So perhaps maybe I'm struggling with giving feedback because I'm an introvert, really. I don't know how to have courageous conversations. And my manager has recognized that. So part of my leadership development is to say, we have a tool that can help you. And the reason why we call it a tool is because I always say to leaders that for human beings, in the absence of tools, we'll use weapons. So the weapon is the thing that causes injury. The tool is the thing that provides the remedy. So we want to take away the weapon and give you a tool. So the weapon of perhaps too direct a conversation or too aggressive a conversation is now we're going to give you the tool, which is training you in how to conduct feedback properly.
Yeah.
And that's an opportunity to address. So that's one pathway. So, and we will use that for our core talents. Now, for our high performers using the 9-box methodology and those persons earmarked for leadership, we have a different pathway because the complexity of the content is going to increase. And so we're going to be partnering with some third-party providers who are subject matter experts to provide very high-level training in areas like negotiation training, as an example, and all of the nuances of leadership. Because what we're trying to do is build a leadership capability in the next generation of leaders. So the university, as we have envisaged it, would enable development of core talent, development of your high performers, high talent, who are your next generation of leaders. And then we also have those corporate programs that address employees at levels below that who are just simply wanting help in coping with life skills. And what do I mean by that is that I am not saying, there are people who are doing a job today, but they have a preferred future. So perhaps I work I could work in a position, but it's not my life's dream. So how do I turn up every day and give of my best in that role whilst I'm balancing this dream I have of doing something else? So between those 2 points of my current reality and my preferred future, how do I bridge the gap? Because I still perhaps I'm a single mom. I have 2 kids I have to take care of. I still have to figure out how to get to work because I don't own a car, and I still have to take care of myself. These are life skills that don't necessarily come naturally. And so those are enablers for stress and prohibits the employee from being of their best. So we have an entire track of life series trainings,
right,
which help people in understanding how to cope with all of the day-to-day events that can become challenging in life. So think about it in that vertical.
And I think that goes for all levels of employee, right? Like, so I've seen those trainings come through and, they're available to all levels. So if you're a cashier or if you're managing a team, we all can benefit from support for key executive function skills like stress management, time management, organization, how to deal with tough decisions. And those are some of the things I would imagine are in there.
Yes.
You referenced something, a couple of things I want to come back to. One is, of course, we budget for trainings, but to your point, like, a lot more is encompassed in the whole picture than just the line. But one thing you mentioned that I wanted to call out is courageous conversations. So that, I assume you're referencing the Susan Scott book, which is a great book. And the premise of the book is how to have hard conversations, because so much of life and business, but more importantly, life is really approaching hard conversations with compassion, directness, but with the sensitivity to do it in the right way. So I think, just for listeners, like that would be a great area to focus on. It's something I'm working on. It's a practice that we all can work on.
Absolutely. And the thing about courageous conversations is that we have them. We just don't have them with the other party. So typically in human behavior and human psychology, you have what is now the internal conversation. And if you were to see, the cartoons that we see when we were growing up, you read a comic book, if we walked around with a thought bubble over our head.
Yeah, exactly.
Many people,
we all have thought bubbles.
The world would probably fall apart.
Yeah.
So because the reality is there is a lot of conversation going on, but it's going on in here and it's not going on out there. But the difficulty with that is that it does not then address the elephant in the room, and it creates escapism. Escapism means that we found ways to escape it. And the one thing about building teams for us as leaders as well, it forces us to have to address the tough issues and to address the proverbial elephants in the room. Because every leader I speak with tell me, they want to have a high-performing team. But, high-performing teams, they're like death, in the sense that everyone wants to go to heaven, but no one wants to die. So everyone wants a high performing team, but very few people sometimes want to pay the price, because the price for high performance teams is that you have to pay the price of psychological safety, meaning that you have to give me the latitude to give you the feedback and have an opinion that may be very different from yours, right? So that you're not in an echo chamber where the only voice you hear coming back towards you is your own. You may have to empower me and give me the opportunity to fail. Right. And so on and so forth. And some of those things can become very uncomfortable for leaders, but yet you want a high performing team. So it's kind of like, I want this thing, but am I prepared to pay the price to get it? And good leaders in good organizations who understand that there is that trade-off, are able to create teams. And that's why I encourage all of our leaders, and even for me, in our company, one of the exciting things, I always like to frame it this way, if you think about an organization where we have no titles, and I say to you, hi, I'm Terry, and I'm accountable for human resources. Not responsible for, because responsible for now introduces sometimes a little bit of ego, because I feel like I have this is mine.
Yeah.
But accountability creates a whole different paradigm, because now I'm actually acknowledging, wow, I'm accountable for all of this.
I need to make this happen.
So imagine if we were walking around introducing ourselves as, I'm David, and I'm accountable for transformation within this company. And I'm Terry, and I'm accountable for, and we get rid of titles. Think about what that means for the psyche of the organization. But in terms of,
oh man, I actually need to make this happen. It's on me. That I exercise an independent judgment and that feeling of responsibility, meaning like, hey, this is my duty and duty of care. This is this is what I'm charged to do. It's a very different feeling than I own this.
And that's a huge part of the DNA of high performing teams, right? Getting to that point where, you don't need to remind people who you are. They know who you are. You're the first among equals, and creating the latitude for failure, for respectful and candid feedback, and for the rules of engagement around how you handle and resolve conflict.
Right.
You think about it. Even in war, we have rules. You're actually killing one another, but there are rules to how we do that in war. Right. So think about it in the team. You have to have rules. And
sometimes those rules are unspoken. They're called norms.
Yep.
Right. And sometimes they're actually specified. They may be policy or practices within a company, but so much in all those things together, so much of it is really what ends up making what we call culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And culture is, I always say culture is difficult to change, but it's easy to influence. And you just came back from a bit of a whirlwind tour where you were seeing different cultures, culture in Aruba, culture in Barbados, and maybe any other stops you made. And, it's difficult to change that culture, but it's very easy to influence it. And social media has proven that,
for good and for bad.
For good and for bad. And hence why there are people making tons of money today, and they're not labeled as changers, but they're labeled as influencers.
Yes. Right. You can find them on TikTok, Instagram.
They label influencers.
YouTube too.
So I think that for us as leaders, as we continue in this very exciting journey that we have in PriceSmart, is for us to, within our teams, within our workspaces, to understand that we do have the power to influence culture where we see that there's opportunity to influence it for the better. And I think that once we keep that in our minds, we would definitely be more successful.
Yeah, that's such a positive message. I really want to repeat it. You have the power to influence culture at this company for the better, each of you, and you're all accountable for it. No, so I just have a couple more more shorter questions as we start to wrap up. One of them in this theme, can you recommend for our listeners anything that you've read or maybe watched recently, that you found really insightful? I mean, I know you're an avid reader, you're an avid podcast listener, you're an avid learner. So is there anything that you've encountered recently that you think is particularly kind of thought-provoking that you want to share?
Yeah, I watch fiction. Okay, but I won't read it.
Okay.
So I don't read fiction.
You're not a novel guy.
Nah, I'll watch it, but I won't read it.
All right.
And I watch it because it's entertainment, but I read for knowledge and learning and enlightenment. So I read a good book. I must confess, it's a reread because I've read it before. But it's a book by a Vietnamese monk called Thich Nhat Hanh. and it's called The Art of Living. And this is my maybe third time around reading it. And also read recently a book by I think it's Jennifer Hodges, How to Manage and Lead Organizational Change. But that's more nuanced and very.
That sounds like a book of practice.
Book of practice.
Yeah.
But in terms of general reading, yes, I would say the art of living has been something I'll be digesting recently, which is a reread, but a very good read.
Any TV shows or movies?
TV shows and movies, I'm a sci-fi buff. So you'll catch me on anything that's sci-fi, anything that stretches the imagination.
Okay.
And because I'm a girl dad, father of 3 daughters, so and they're sci-fi buffs. So, we together share discourse and opinions.
That's nice. I'm glad you brought up your family, because I think so many of our employees are parents, and so that's kind of a part of yourself. I mean, it's good to share that, because so many of our employees are parents, and we're all, of course, children of parents.
So.
Right. So kind of wrapping up, there's a question that I always close with. Now, I say always, it's number 3, but that I always close with. And that is, can you think of something or share something that you learned from somebody at PriceSmart in the last year that really impacted you?
Interesting enough, yes. I think I would say that they reminded me of something rather than I learned.
That's okay.
And it had to do with the conversation. You were having a general conversation, and sometimes we all have our peaks and valleys. We have our good days, not so good days. Sometimes we are overwhelmed or overthink. And in the midst of that conversation, they said to me, well, Terry, in the end, this too shall pass. And then it reminded me of something I learned a long time ago, that says, never mistake a season for an eternity. And they reminded me of that. And it was a very, very thoughtful conversation that I had with them.
I like that. Yeah. Everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end.
Correct.
All right, Terry. Hey, thank you so much for joining me on the At the Club podcast. This has been really fun. And I appreciate all the things you shared with us.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks, dude.
No worries. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today at the club. This was a great conversation, and we want to hear from you. We want to hear, what do you want to learn about? Are there things you'd enjoy seeing? We definitely want to hear from you, and stay tuned for the next episode.